Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Thank you so much for joining me on this Friday morning afternoon. My name is Lauren Van Schulfgard. I'm with the Tribal Law and Policy Institute, and I spearhead our Tribal Healing to Wellness Court Training and Technical Assistance project. This webinar is going to be a big bird's eye view overview of the key components and how they interrelate with the adult drug court standards. Like I said, this is going to be a big picture. The standards include lots and lots of details, some of which that are directly applicable to tribes, some less so. But in either case, I encourage you to read them at your leisure, however that might be. But this is intended to just give you an idea of what's located inside, specifically as it relates to the grants that we are furiously putting together, both for CTAS and for BJA. If you have any questions throughout the program, feel free to type them into our questions bar located on the right of your screen. We'll be addressing questions at the end of the webinar, but feel free to type them in as they come to you. In the handouts section, you will find a PDF of this PowerPoint. It's there for you to follow along in case GoToWebinar cuts out on you for any reason. You can also print it out and look at it at your leisure. I will also be recording and posting this webinar on our website, wellnesscourts.org, so that you can refer to it later or refer any colleagues to this presentation. So let's dive right in. The tribal key components. This is what I'm going to be framing this presentation around. The key components were originally developed in 2002 based on the state key components. They are the foundational structures around which we build our healing to wellness courts. There are a couple significant differences between the tribal and the state key components listed here, primarily as it involves tribal sovereignty, tribal court development, and our focus on culture, tradition, and our kin ties. But there are also significant similarities between the key components, particularly as they involve supervision of participants, sanctions and incentives, those kinds of things. Either way, we are bound by the tribal key components, including when it comes to writing our grant solicitations, whether it's under the CTAS or it's under the BJA Adult Drug Court solicitation. They want us abiding by the tribal key components. So you can find those online. So this presentation is about the drug court standards and how they relate to the key components. The standards were produced by the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. Volume 1 came out in 2013, and Volume 2 came out the following year. These standards are the culmination of drug courts being in practice for over 25 years. When the key components originally came out, they were somewhat anecdotal. What do we think are going to make for really effective drug courts? What do we think that courts should be following when they do that? Well, now that courts have been in operation for a while, they were able to pull together some explicit research based on hard facts of what is in fact working. It turned out that the key components are right on. They are exactly what we should be doing, but they are by nature very broad. The standards are intended to provide very explicit, detailed recommendations for what you should be doing because we've seen them in practice and what courts have been doing. The huge asterisk here, of course, is that the standards did not look at any studies based in Indian country. So we don't know yet what explicitly works in Indian country or if there are any significant differences between county, municipal, state courts, and tribal courts. Nevertheless, I think there are a lot of really brilliant lessons learned that we can take from the standards. And if you are going to be applying, particularly for the BJA Adult Drug Court Grant, you're going to be expected to abide by the standards regardless. So you might as well know what's in them. So here's why we're looking at it. They're research-based. They offer us an opportunity to actually measure our fidelity to the wellness court model by looking at, for example, we'll be looking at, does the judge interact with the participant for at least 3 minutes? because we know now that if the judge is interacting for at least 3 minutes, we see better outcomes. In Indian country, of course, judges are usually interacting with the participants upwards of 5 to 10 minutes, which has proven to be only even better. They limit and reduce our legal errors. We've also found that where most of the standards are based on efficiency and effectiveness of the drug court, some of our practices have actually been causing participants harm. And so we don't want that. At the bare minimum, we don't want to be causing our participants harm. And the standards allow us to identify where those potential errors are. And our funding sources are asking us to abide by the standards. Here are the key components. If you've ever participated in a TLPI training or webinar, you know that we like to think about the healing to wellness court component in a cyclical fashion. For you visual learners, it's really difficult to conceive of the components in any kind of linear or hierarchical fashion. They just don't work that way. They really bounce off of each other. There's not a great place to start or end with them. They're very much interrelated. I think the standards work in the very same way. They're not in any chronological order or order of importance. You kind of just have to dive right in. So TLPI has addressed the standards before. If you attended our Healing to Wellness Court Enhancement Training, you saw the brilliant Carrie Garrow and Charlene Jackson present on this. This PowerPoint is available online. I also invite you to consider attending our training next year, where we will also be approaching the standards. But just so you know, this training is also online, or at least just the PowerPoint. Also, Jeff Kushner, the State Drug Court Coordinator for Montana, presented specifically on the treatment perspective concerning continuing care and recovery support services and how they're reflected in the standards. This was a nice, specific presentation that got into the weeds of this particular subject. It's a really great PowerPoint. It's on our website, so I encourage you to check it out. Okay, so how are we going to approach these standards? If you are putting together a BJA adult drug court grant right now, you're being asked to describe your drug court, specifically each of these key features. I also have seen these features as a useful template for putting together a CTAS application. But either way, you're being expected to describe each of these things. So as we go through this presentation, I have highlighted where these things are implicated, just as a sort of, here's things to think about when you are addressing this portion of your application. Okay, diving right in. Just to note, some of the language for the key components in the standards I've abbreviated just for the sake of the PowerPoint. I have tried to keep the spirit of the language there, but just know the language might differ a little bit. So key component 1 really is big picture. We're bringing together all of these different systems using a team approach to heal our participants and promote the Native Nation building and the well-being of the community. An interesting point that the standards make, the drug court healing to wellness court model is non-adversarial, but that doesn't mean it's non-advocacy. We are still advocating for our participants, including both from the prosecutor and defense counsel perspective. That means when we have our team, we want both a prosecutor and a defense counsel on our team. The standards have identified these 7 positions that they think are critical for inclusion on your drug court team. You can have more, such as a representative from behavioral health, social services, housing, a cultural advisor, but at the minimum, these 7 perspectives should be represented on your team. As I just stated, the prosecutor and defense counsel to represent sort of both sides of the coin, the judge, coordinator, a treatment representative, which we're going to be discussing in great length, community supervision representative, and law enforcement. Going into key 2, which is how our participants enter the wellness court, we want a broad number of referral points and legal processes to have as big a net as possible for getting participants into our court, but we still want to ensure that that process promotes our tribal sovereignty and protects participants' due process rights. So you'll see the two circles here. This is where I think that you'll be describing your eligibility process, particularly whether you are pre-adjudication or post-adjudication. Are participants entering your wellness court before they are formally sentenced or convicted, or after, or both? And how do you differentiate between those two? So one of the big things that the research has revealed is a tendency for courts to have a subjective criteria for participants who enter their court. Some courts were using suitability determinations. Is this candidate motivated to get into wellness court? Are they emotionally ready for the demands that wellness court is going to put on them? It has shown that those suitability determinations don't have any impact on who successfully graduates or terminates from the program, or whether or not they're going to reoffend after they exit the program. Instead, all that they have accomplished is narrowing the field of people that come into drug court when we want to make that net as big as possible. So it's important that however you're letting people into your court, that criteria is objective, and the best way to achieve that objectivity is to have it in writing. It's the same for everybody. Every referral point has that eligibility criteria on their desk. So one of the big implications of this subjective criteria was a disproportionate impact on what the standards describe as historically disadvantaged groups. This refers to racial minorities, ethnicity, sexual orientation, all religious and national origin, particularly as it applies to racial categories. There were huge disproportionality impacts. Different races were not getting into drug court, and when they were in, they were experiencing disproportionate dispositions. By dispositions, they mean they were being graduated or terminated at different rates, purely based on their race, as the impacts were showing. And so because of this, it's critical that we have objective criteria. For tribal courts, of course, this is a little bit different for us because our target population is probably necessarily excluded to just Indians. But nevertheless, that doesn't mean that we don't have two different genders in our population. We potentially might have individuals that may or may not be less traditional or more traditional. We still can have different groups within our population, and so it's incumbent upon us to be aware that differences might occur, to be able to measure when those differences are occurring, and then adjust our criteria to better even things out. I threw in these incentives and sanctions considerations just because I think they're impacted here with due process. Advance notice. A substantial body of research has proven that criminal defendants are more likely to respect and go with the flow of an adverse judgment or a sanction if they believe that the procedures were fair. And this was sort of threefold that the standards found. One, if they believed they were given a reasonable opportunity to be heard. Two, if they were treated similar to a similarly situated individual. This means someone that was in the same phase as them and conducted the same kind of behavior, such as they also got a positive drug test, and so they received the same kind of sanction. And three, they were accorded respect and dignity. The standards did some research on judges that were maybe used a shaming technique or maybe had used abusive language over and over again. That was proven not to be helpful whatsoever. Within the hearing, the participants should be accorded respect and dignity. And the advance notice really goes to that perceived fairness as well as actual fairness. Did they have were they able to know what was coming? Did they know what the consequences are of coming into drug court? They were going to be expected to go to court every week. They were going to be drug tested so frequently. Did they know of these consequences if they were terminated, that they were going to have to go back to jail? Did they know that ahead of time? Similarly, did they know what would happen if they were terminated? Did they know what would happen if they graduated? The termination criteria here, there's been a lot of research going into why you need to terminate somebody, particularly if they're not responding to the treatment. This could be that you just don't have the resources within your community to respond to their needs, such as perhaps there is a severe mental illness that you're not able to address, or they're just not responding to the treatment. It's just not taking. They're just getting positive drug tests over and over again, even though they're complying with all of your other program requirements. They're going to counseling, they're meeting with their case manager, they're showing up, but they're still testing positive. It may not be that you're able to serve them. However, if you do terminate them, they shouldn't be punished because treatment didn't take. And so you may need to augment their sentence so that they don't get kicked further down the road and treated as if they were being non-compliant. Finally, a lot of drug courts were asked, what do you think your cap is? And they would be like, well, we think we can only serve 30 participants and would cap it there. No arbitrary restrictions. Drug courts are sort of expensive up front, but the selling point is that we save the criminal justice system and the treatment system significant dollars in the long run, but we're only able to achieve that if we start serving the number of individuals that actually needs us. Surveys have shown that of all the individuals that need drug court, that have a severe addiction and have a high need for services, only 10% of those individuals are getting into drug court across the country, and that is true in Indian country as well. The caseloads are way smaller than the actual need, and so it's incumbent upon us to try and expand our scope as much as possible. Screening and eligibility. This is intimately tied with key component 2, our entry and entry points and referral points. Eligible court-involved substance abusing candidates are identified early through legal and clinical screening for eligibility and are promptly placed into wellness court. So here we're really talking about screening and assessments as far as our application goes. For the standards, this has hopefully been ringing in your ears over and over again. The best outcomes have been experienced when we target the high-risk, high-need participants. This is not only for whom the drug court model is designed, but it's also for whom they most strongly benefit from drug court. On the flip side, we've actually seen participants who do not fall in the high-risk, high-need category not only not do well in wellness court, but they actually suffer harm. They suffer the more potential for relapse. They're being forced to go through services that they don't need. It's just not a good system. That doesn't mean that you can't serve them. If you are going for a larger scope, which I know a lot of tribes are because your caseload is just necessarily smaller, but you still have candidates that represent all 4 quadrants of the risk-need assessment, use alternative tracks. The big takeaway here is that you don't want to mix populations, because when you expose a low-risk, low-need participant to high-risk, high-need participants, you're going to rub off some bad habits, among many, many other things. How do we determine if someone is high-risk or high-need? We use a validated eligibility assessment. This was another area where individuals were, I've been working in this field for a long time, I know this person, I know their family. Those are all huge pluses, but the use of a validated eligibility assessment will hopefully just affirm what you already know, but it will also catch if you're being potentially a little biased, even if it's unknowingly. Using an assessment tool is going to help catch those. It's also going to provide some good data for down the road, and so it's encouraged over and over and over again. The appendix in the volume 1 has a list of assessment tools in case you don't know where to start. These are the predominantly used assessment tools, both in and out of Indian country. Criminal history disqualifications. The BJA excludes funding for violent offenders, So a lot of tribal drug courts have similarly excluded violent offenders. Interestingly, the research has shown that there's not any different outcomes that come when you exclude violent offenders. In fact, those often are the individuals that are most high risk, high need. So barring legal prohibitions, there's not really a reason to exclude them. The same goes for drug dealing. A lot of courts were excluding drug dealers on the premise that they weren't actually addicts, they were just drug dealers. That can be true, but the way that you differentiate between that is with your assessment tool, because sometimes the drug dealers are also addicts, and it's those addicts that we want to serve. Clinical disqualifications. Some drug courts were just blanket excluding mental illness candidates, as well as individuals who had severe medical conditions, maybe conditions that they were prescribed some heavy-duty opiates on. There is no reason that you should just be blanket clinically disqualifying people, and particularly as it concerns medically assisted treatment. The federal government has really stepped behind medically assisted treatment and endorsed it to the extent that you cannot exclude someone who's on MAT. This is someone who's on something like Suboxone or buprenorphine or those other types of medications that are intended for individuals addicted to opiates. You may not have it offered in your community, but if you do, you can't exclude someone just because they're on it. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't be intimately involved with that system, ensuring that they're abiding by their own fidelity to the model, but just be aware of that. Mental health treatment, we want to be assessing all of our participants for mental health, especially because we know so many of our candidates have some form of mental illness, particularly anxiety disorders or trauma. Some courts were approaching mental illness and addiction as sort of exclusionary things that we need to address one step at a time. So first we need you to get sober, and then we're going to address your mental illness, or vice versa. It turns out that it just doesn't work that way. A lot of times people are using drugs as a sort of self-medication for a mental illness. Alternatively, they are suffering mental illness because their drug use has exposed them to some traumatizing events. And so the data has really shown that we need to treat these concurrently at the same time, because often they've become so interlinked and connected that that's the only way to do it. This just goes with who we want to let into our court. Some courts were having a very exclusion that there needs to be a drug-related charge. The truth is, we're screening for if you have an addiction and you committed a crime. Those two do not need to be related, just so long as you have those two. And so expand your legal criteria as greatly as you can, just so long as people are also clinically in need of drug court. This concerns promptness. We want to get our participants into drug court as quickly as possible. Interestingly, the standards, at least from what I saw, didn't have anything explicitly about the sooner we get into drug court, the better. So we know anecdotally that the longer the time passes between this sort of triggering event, the worse. And that's because we want to get people into treatment as soon as possible. And so even if you're not able to formally have them in drug court from a legal perspective, the sooner that you can connect a candidate to treatment, the better. So they may start treatment 2 days after their arrest, but are not formally in drug court until 30 days after their arrest. That's okay, as long as they are in treatment as soon as possible. So treatment. These standards have devoted an extensive amount of research and lessons learned from treatment. Treatment is not my particular area of expertise, so I apologize if I missed some of the nuances here, but I do want you to point you into this direction. Your treatment provider should really pore over these, but as we know, all of our team members should at least be exposed to some of these best practices. Our own key component asks that we provide access to holistic, structured, and phased treatment and rehabilitation services that incorporate culture and tradition. Pretty cool, as we'll see, that incorporation of culture and tradition is at least tangentially supported by the standards. So for our grant application, our phases structure, our evidence-based interventions, and our recovery support are all implicated here. So Standard 5. Standard 5 is the big one, and so I've included its actual language here. They want participants to receive standardized assessment of their treatment needs. Treatment is not tied to program compliance, so treatment isn't an incentive. We don't take away treatment as a punishment. Those are exclusive entities. And our providers are trained to deliver the continuum of evidence-based interventions. What do I mean by continuum? Treatment has a lot of different variables or a lot of different iterations. That can include detoxification, residential treatment, sober living, day treatment, intensive outpatient, and outpatient services. Ideally, our treatment providers are able to provide this entire continuum. So the treatments, and this is where I think the standards, I think they're really most helpful here when they provide these explicit recommendations. For dosage and duration, they recommend in phase 1 that an individual is getting about 6 to 10 hours of counseling a week. So if your phases, in your phase 1, you're having participants go to counseling, individual 3 times a week, and they need to go to a peer support 2 times a week, then you're likely getting that 6 to 10 hours criteria, which is great. Over the entire course of your Healing to Wellness course, a participant should have received around 200 hours of counseling. But this is flexible depending on the needs of the participant, right? And so our treatment provider is the one who's going to be developing a treatment plan for our participant, and they're going to, either really intensify it in the beginning, taper off later, want to increase counseling if we know an event requires that. This is in the realm of our treatment provider, but around 200 hours is what we're shooting for. This means at least meeting once a week with our treatment provider. And for group counseling, it's a lot of drug courts are requiring every single participant for group counseling, but it turns out maybe some individuals are not suitable for group counseling. This might be particularly true if you have mostly men in your pool of participants, but maybe only a few women. We've seen that women really do much better in a gender-specific group, and so if it's mostly men in the group, they might just do better in individual counseling if you don't offer a gender-specific group. So in either case, we want to screen that individual to see if they are suitable for group counseling. If you do offer a group, it's been shown that no more than 12 participants in one group at a time. Any more than 12, and you start to lose meaningful participation, it gets a little rowdy, people start to dominate the conversation, and it's just less effective. As I mentioned before, we want to allow medical-assisted treatment as it's medically necessary, but be sure to monitor how that program is being managed. Evidence-based treatment. This probably appears 1,000 times throughout the standards. Maybe not 1,000, but it appears a lot. There's a huge correlation seen between the use of evidence-based treatment and positive outcomes. They just work better than not. By evidence-based treatments, we mean treatments that are documented in manuals. They provide training on how they should be implemented, and they have been studied for their effectiveness, so hence the evidence-based. There are only 1 or 2 treatments that have been studied within Indian country. We will talk about that more in a separate webinar. They are out there, but nevertheless, Other ones I know tribes use with a lot of great success, including, for example, the moral recognition therapy that's really popular. SAMHSA provides a website that's linked here, the National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs. There you can find a list of all the really common evidence-based treatments and find more information about them. The standards just mention these three as examples. They're not necessarily endorsed more than others. So here I've combined a couple things. The standards, I think, brilliantly talk about the importance of including trauma-informed services among our care. We know that 1 in about 3 individuals coming in have been exposed to some kind of trauma, but really interesting, among female participants, more than 80% have experienced a serious traumatic event in their lifetime. And needing trauma-informed services because of that. Mental illness is talked about previously. They found that even though a lot of our participants have mental illness, it's not necessarily tied to what they call criminogenic needs, or by that they mean the likelihood that you're going to re-offend. It does affect your ability to recovery, but it's not necessarily tied to reoffense. That is different for PTSD. PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, is one of the few mental illnesses that is tied to criminogenic needs. People who have been in the criminal justice system who have PTSD are approximately 1.5 times more likely to reoffend than those without PTSD. That just underscores the importance that the services that we're offering to our participants is trauma-informed. I've included this quote at the bottom that's actually from a non-native publication talking about the importance of considering not just individual trauma, but community trauma and intergenerational trauma. I think this has pretty obvious and significant implications for our Native communities. When we are considering the trauma that our participants might be bringing in, it might not be directed exclusively to a past event. It's important that we receive training both on what that means as well as how we can specifically address that within our Healing to Wellness course. A couple more considerations. Peer support groups have proven to be extremely effective. They're more effective later in the Healing to Wellness course. In phase 1, a participant who is really trying to establish stability is not quite prepared for a peer support group. So that may be something that you want to encourage later in the phases instead of right away. Continuing care, there's a lot of new data coming out about the importance of aftercare, particularly after we're seeing lots of relapse numbers from our successful graduates, and that means that we need to stay in contact. Jeff Kushner, in his presentation at the enhancement training, had a really good segment on this importance of continuing care and the different ways that we can stay in contact with our participants. I encourage you to check that out. A lot of it is pretty easy and not very intrusive, but the big takeaway here is 90 days. That appears to be a magic number for how long we should be staying in contact with our participants at least. We saw some clinician caseload numbers, really interesting. I think this is a little less applicable for our drug court, but especially if you have a treatment provider for which Healing to Wellness court is only one of their duties, then you want to make sure they're not too overburdened. So here, these standards offer sort of these magic numbers, 50 participants for our, just for our case manager, 40 participants if they're providing therapy, and they should only have a 30-person caseload if they're providing both case management and individual therapy. So hopefully you live in the beautiful world in which you're able to achieve these numbers, but if not, then it's maybe something you just want to put on the radar for watching your outcomes to see if they're being affected by this high caseload of your clinician. Some considerations from the treatment perspective for incentives and sanctions. As I mentioned before, our therapeutic adjustments, that's a clinician determination. That is not something that we should be tying to our sanctions and incentives. And that line can get real blurry real fast, no doubt about it. And so it's something that you just want to be on watch of. This is why it's so important that our treatment providers attend our staffing and hearings regularly so that they can both communicate, this participant needs an adjustment in their treatment, such as maybe they need more counseling, maybe they're ready for group in response to maybe a positive drug test or some other change in behavior, as well as to catch the court and say, whoa, 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 you can't just order someone to more counseling if they don't need it. That's a therapeutic need. That's not what we're here for. Also, just watching out for your progressive sanctions and incentives. Know that in the first phase, our participants are just achieving stability. So as you've seen often in sanction and incentive trainings, we want to be careful not to punish our participants in phase 1 because they received a positive drug test. They're just getting started. That should be sanctioned only minutely, as opposed to if they're in a later phase, then they should be sanctioned more severely. But we'll get into that more with sanctions and incentives. As far as jail is concerned, jail should not be used to try and achieve more negative drug tests. That is, again, a clinical desire, not a one that we can achieve with jail. And the truth is, it just doesn't work. We've seen courts over and over again try to jail someone out of their addiction, and it's just not very effective. And it's a really expensive tactic, so another thing just to be aware of. Supervision. This includes both drug testing and case management, both in dual. For a long time, the emphasis was just on drug testing, but the truth is, coupled with case management is what makes Healing to Wellness Court that holistic and effective tactic that it is. So, caseloads, just like we saw with the clinician, we saw magic numbers with supervision. By supervision, we primarily mean the probation officer, but whoever is conducting the primary supervision for your check-ins, maybe your house visits, that role. 30 participants seems to be the number at which, all right, if you have more than 30, we just want to keep an eye out to make sure everything is in line, but definitely don't have, instead of note, it should be not more than 50 participants. Drug testing, hopefully many of you know, 2 times a week is the magic number, at least. Interestingly, unlike other program requirements where supervision is tapered down as they progress through the phases, the standards recommend keeping drug testing at a steady level and not tapering it down until all other program requirements have been tapered down. And this is in order to monitor if a relapse occurs. So you've taken away the number of times they have to come to court. They don't have to check in with their probation officer as much. You've tapered all those down, but you're still drug testing at least 2 times a week, just to keep an eye out. Random testing. This means that not only does it not take place every Tuesday, but it's just as likely to take place on nights and weekends as it is Monday morning. This is primarily because a lot of substance use is taking place on nights and weekends, and so as a way of encouraging sobriety, having a drug test, the possibility of a drug test hanging over you is only effective if it's just as likely when at any point in the day, not just when we're working. Urine specimens should be delivered within 8 hours. That way we can actually determine if substance use was taking place. So the standards have a really, really descriptive use of drug testing procedures and protocols. I've just listed a few here, such as how many different substances you should be testing for, whether you should be switching it up, how to witness someone providing a drug test collection, how to determine if someone is messing with it, if they are trying to give you a fraudulent test. They have lots and lots of really good protocols here that I don't detail. I highly recommend that you check them out, especially if you're looking at modifying your drug testing procedures. These provide some just great, here's where you should start, and here's at least things to consider if you are not sure you're having a good protocol. Complementary treatment. I'm going to say this is probably my favorite part of the standards, if I could have a favorite, just because I think one of the great things that Healing to Wellness Courts does is help connect our participants to the life skills that are going to help provide sobriety far beyond Healing to Wellness Court. Also, we've seen that these are the things necessary for effective recovery. Scope, they identify a wide range scope, but that includes at least housing assistance, mental health, trauma-informed services that I mentioned previously, criminal thinking interventions, family counseling, which we're pushing more and more the importance of including family, that I think has been a tribal perspective for a long time, vocational and educational services, and medical and dental needs. A lot of these seem pretty basic, but I think it's important to approach these in an objective fashion to look at your Healing to Wellness Court and see if you're actually doing these. Here you can see this is from statewide studies again, so no tribal Healing to Wellness Court. So I think we can see these reflected in a lot of our own data. A lot, if not most, of our participants are coming into drug court with a lot of needs. They don't have a job, they don't have a high school diploma, they don't have a home. These are needs that are going to need to be addressed, not only for their long-term success, but also for their short-term success in Healing to Wellness Court. The sequence and timing. So they break up the different scope between responsivity needs, criminogenic needs, and maintenance needs. So in phase 1, when we're just trying to achieve stability, we know that our participants are going to have a hard time getting that stability if they don't have something like housing, or if they don't have a reliable place to go home. If they're experiencing withdrawal symptoms, they're not going to be very successful in drug court. And so those are those basic needs that we want to address so that they can start to respond to treatment. So that's what we mean by responsive. After they've achieved stabilization and they're moving along through phases 2 and 3 and starting to get the rhythm of Healing to Wellness Court, that's when we can start to address their criminogenic needs. Before the criminal thinking interventions, there are a couple of curricula that address these criminal thinking interventions that I mentioned previously, such as moral recognition therapy. This also involves delinquent peers, which I think is a big one. As our participants are moving through the program, they're redefining their entire social network, most of which had been based on other drug users. And so redefining that sort of means redefining who we are and who we hang out with. And this means finding more pro-social peers as well as family members. And then finally, as we move later into the program, this can be earlier than phase 4, but often phase 4, how do we maintain the sobriety that we've now achieved? And that means our vocational, our educational goals. What the standards have found is that sequencing these different services has proved the most effective, but also it's really, you're not going to see a whole lot of success when you try and get your participant to address their educational needs in phase 1. They're just not ready for it yet. And so it's important to sort of hold that off for a little bit later. Our clinical case manager. The standards identify the clinical case manager as a real clinical position. And this is because this is someone who is trained to provide these assessments that they identify in Appendix C that will help match our participant with these responsivity, criminogenic, and maintenance needs. But this is also just someone who is familiar with the services in your community. Do they know what's out there? Can they help connect them to those services? And can they help field any sort of discrepancies between what the services are requiring? For example, if your participant also has a dependency case and they're being required to go to parenting classes, are you able to help the participant schedule those parenting classes with their other classes? So I've just highlighted a couple of these complementary services that we should be hopefully engaging with our participants, or at least hooking up with other services in our community. We have seen so many great outcomes when we have started to engage with our family and friends. That's because they're the ones that are going to really take this home. So many of our participants are also parents and maybe don't have stellar parenting skills because either they just were never taught those at home, or their substance abuse has interfered with that. And so parenting classes, even if they don't have a dependency case, may be a great tool that's needed. I've just identified some programs here. And then, as I mentioned, the importance of vocational needs. Sanctions and incentives. We are moving right along. Key component 6 asks that progressive incentives and sanctions be used to encourage participant compliance. So this involves both incentives and sanctions as a separate entity, as well as our phases. There are a lot of good trainings out there just on incentives and sanctions, both that we've offered on wellnesscourts.org, but I also recommend some online sources I've identified at the end, including Drug Court Online. They have webinars that you can look at that specifically talk about the proximal and distal goals, have a list of sanctions. The link here on progressive sanctions is the list of sanctions that NDCI has put out. So if you're looking of just a straight, we need just a list of possible sanctions that we can use, that's a good template to base yours off of. So starting here with equivalent consequences, this goes to, again, our disproportionate impact, but also our participants' perceived fairness. It's important that we are providing the same incentives and sanctions for similarly situated participants. They should be able to anticipate that, oh, I had a positive drug test, I know what's coming. That doesn't mean that it's rigid. You still want flexibility because, as we know, every participant is different. Every participant has their own story for what was going on, and it's really important for us to respond to those idiosyncrasies. Progressive sanctions. This goes to those proximal and distal goals. Both, we know that if we hit them with a hammer right at the beginning, we're going to get a ceiling effect. If we throw them everything at once, then there's really no reason to comply further on because they've already experienced the worst case. Similarly, if we're a little too weak, if we just slap them on the wrist for even big sanctions, then that can cause habituation. We see this also with jail, as we'll discuss a little bit later. Jail can hit a ceiling effect really quickly, and it's no longer effective. So we want a wide breadth to choose from, and we want a predictable list to choose from. Incentivized productivity. There's been a 4-to-1 ratio that's really encouraged, and it is still encouraged. The standards didn't find any explicit data because by 4-to-1 they mean that for every sanction you're giving 4 incentives. Well, what the standards found was that this was more behavior-driven because the nature of incentives and sanctions is you're responding to good and bad behavior. So did the 4-to-1 ratio cause the good behavior, or did the good behavior just reveal a 4-to-1 ratio? We don't know. But nevertheless, it appears to be providing good outcomes. And so because we want to incentivize good behavior, not just punish bad behavior, we want to be providing as many incentives as possible. Incentives can be really simple and primarily include praise from the bench by the judge, but it can also be monetary incentives such as gift cards, and a whole slew of that I encourage you to check out in a separate list of incentives. Phase promotion. Like our incentives and sanctions, the criteria for how to advance from one phase to the next should be objective, it should be written down, and it should be realistic. This is something that our participants can achieve in the time frame that we put out. If over and over again our participants are taking twice or 3 times as long to advance from a phase as they think they should, then maybe we should re-examine our criteria in our phases. Because of our distal and proximal goals, as the participant advances in a phase, our sanctions should increase for bad behavior, and our incentives should decrease. We should be expecting this behavior, and vice versa for early phases. Again, treatment is for clinical reasons only, and so if our treatment provider thinks that they still need to be going to individual counseling 4 times a week in phase 3, then that's what our treatment provider has recommended. And also, as I mentioned, drug testing should be the last thing to be reduced. So here's the ceiling effect for jail. Jail has been seen to be effective. It's not that it should be completely cut out, although I know some tribal courts have completely cut it out. But if you do use it, it should be used sparingly. Specifically, 3 to 5 days. What I've seen some courts use really effectively is if they use jail as a sanction, they'll use it on the weekend for 2 days. What we've seen is that after 3 to 5 days, the participant is habituated into jail, and that any kind of behavior modification benefit we were going to see from jail is completely moot after 5 days. So if you sentence someone to 2 weeks, that's just not effective as far as behavior modification goes. For phase promotion, it's totally appropriate to not advance someone or return them to an earlier phase if they relapse, if they have a positive drug test. However, there have been poor outcomes seen when you return someone to the very beginning, day 1, phase 1. This has produced what they call the abstinence violation effect. Basically, that means that, everything I accomplished in treatment didn't work. This is totally futile. I'm just going to give up. We want to avoid that feeling, which is already really prominent for a lot of our participants. And so if someone has a positive drug test in phase 3, totally appropriate to return them to phase 2. But if they're pretty far along, try and resist putting them back all the way to phase 1. Okay, judicial interaction. We know that the importance of the judge cannot be overstated, and thankfully, these standards have really underscored that. The judge is critical. The judge's presence and demeanor both have really great outcomes for our participants. The consistent docket, I see this less applicable for tribes, but I still want to put it out there. If your tribe has a rotating bench policy, really great outcomes have been seen for judges that serve on drug court for at least 2 years. And that's because, as you can see, these standards, for example, are really complicated and cover a lot of different areas, which means it takes time for a judge to get exposed to all of these best practices, as well as to just get in the groove of being an effective wellness court judge. And so the longer that same judge is serving on the same wellness court, the better. For a long time, judges were not attending staffings. Just other team members were getting together, producing a report and providing it to the judge. It was sort of seen as an ex parte communication or other type of violation of judicial ethics to be attending the staffing. Judicial ethics have since been updated to no longer make it an ethical violation, but rather to encourage attendance at the staffing. More and more, this is seen as really beneficial. It's important that the judge be part of this really frank discussion that the team is going on updating the participant progress, as well as just being a team leader. We see really great outcomes of attending the staffing. Hearings, I know tribes are all doing this. I think this is more of a state issue, but for most tribes I know, hearings are occurring at least every week. The standards recommend at least every 2 weeks. I haven't seen any data to suggest that once a week is better or worse than every 2 weeks. Anecdotally, I'm inclined to think that once a week, especially in the first 1 or 2 phases, is better, but there's no data yet to suggest that. There is data to suggest that, especially in the later phases, no less than 4 weeks. So it's perfectly acceptable and probably encouraged as your participant progresses through the phases. One of the incentives is that they don't have to come to court as often, but they should at least be coming at least once a month. Again, I know judges in Indian country are spending significant time with the participants on the bench. In fact, we sometimes have the opposite problem of our hearings going 2 or 3 hours because we're spending so much time with the participant. But at a minimum, the judge should be spending 3 minutes with each participant and upwards of 7 minutes. For us, I think more time the better that we're spending with the participants, but I will say be cognizant of the time that you're asking participants to be in the hearing, as well as our fellow team members. An hour-long hearing, I think, is appropriate, even if you have a caseload of 20 or 30 participants. Just want to watch the clock. But it's a great problem to have. I love that that's our problem. This is just showing that 2 weeks is better than less. Roles and responsibilities of the judge. As I mentioned earlier, abusive language from the bench has proven not to be very effective at all and potentially can even do harm. But it's more than that. Studies have found that the relationship that participants have with the judge has been one of the most influential factors for their success. This is one of the first times that a participant might have such a relationship with the judge. They're used to being shamed from the bench. They're used to getting in trouble. But now that we have this non-adversarial, supportive environment, it's shown to be extremely effective. Judicial decision-making. This is another area that judicial ethics has come into play. At the end of the day, a healing to wellness court is a court. And within a court, the judge is the final decision maker, and that's true within healing to wellness court as well. That doesn't mean that we still really benefit from the team coming together, providing their input based on their expertise. That's what makes a healing to wellness court so successful. It's also totally appropriate that if a team wants to vote on what an incentive or sanction should be for a particular participant, they can do that. It's a advisory vote for the judge. The judges who signs the orders and the judges who weighs the evidence, they're the final decision maker. Key component 8, monitoring and evaluation. I unfortunately am not, hopefully yet, an expert in evaluation. I think it's really tempting to sort of assume that you're fine with this. Oh yeah, we'll collect the data. The data has in fact shown that not very many courts are very adept at this. If you are so blessed to have a specific team member whose sole job is data collection and monitoring and evaluation, I think that is the ideal scenario, because this is in fact a really complicated area. This is especially true if you don't have a data management system that's devoted solely to your drug court, or that doesn't speak with your tribal court case management system. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It definitely can be done, but ensuring that you're collecting all of the appropriate data and that you're able to pull that data out to really show particular outcomes, that can be sort of complicated and requires attention. It's not something that will just passively happen. So thankfully, they have devoted an entire standard to the importance of monitoring and evaluation. Outcome evaluations are measuring the outcomes of all of our participants. It would be ideal if you have an independent evaluator measure your adherence to the best practices, whether they are these standards, the tribal key components, or a combination, at least every 5 years. That's the goal. In-program outcomes, these are how our participants are doing, including their attendance to treatment, their attendance to our interventions like our criminal thinking and our parenting classes, how their drug tests are measuring, their new arrests. These are reports that hopefully all of our team members are inputting every single day for all of our participants. The criminal recidivism, this is where I think it gets tricky because you need to be able to talk to your overall tribal court system and measure, are our participants, both those who have graduated and those who were terminated, have they been arrested or convicted for at least 3 years after they were in drug court? That's the magic number. Those are the magic numbers that we want to know, because that's how we can communicate to our tribal community that the drug court is effective. Those who were in drug court committed fewer crimes than those who weren't. So that comparison I made is based on the ability to have comparison groups. And so here's our electronic database. The real trick is here, we want a system that all of our team members can access, or we at least want a system that all of our team members can send their information to one person, like our data technician, who can then input that data. Finally, we're nearing towards the end. Key component 9, continuing education. The key components have several standards about the training that should be taking place, such as attending webinars such as this. I'll sort of skim through it. I just want to point out here the importance of getting specific training on implicit cultural biases. SAMHSA just put out a new publication on cultural competence. It's really interesting and I think has real significant ramifications for working with Native Americans. But it also has a good section such as things on like a drug culture and the type of lifestyles that a lot of our participants get into and that we sort of want to break them away from. But that means that we need to understand what that culture is. Our judge should be receiving particular training, and all of us should be receiving trauma-informed training. Even if you're not the counselor, it's important to be cognizant that if a lot of our participants have experienced trauma before, if we have a really noisy court environment, that could be especially disruptive to those of our participants that have experienced trauma. If we're not starting court on time regularly, that can be really disruptive. So just those types of things are important to be aware of. And finally, team interaction. It's kind of a shame that this is key component 10 because I think this is really critical, and this is often an area that a lot of teams experience friction. Even the best teams that get along brilliantly have the tendency to get complacent because of how well they get together. And so the importance of constantly being aware of our team interaction is really where the success or failure of our Healing and Wellness Court hinges. Real basic, we should all be attending staffings and hearings. This is particularly true for the treatment provider. Very strong outcomes have come from courts in which the treatment provider is regularly present. So please, please, please go to hearings. Sharing information. This has been a real point of contention for a lot of courts due to the concerns of confidentiality. It's, in fact, perfectly acceptable for drug courts to all come together and discuss treatment information. This does not mean the intimate details that were discussed within a treatment session, but rather whether or not someone attended or is positively responding to treatment. And that's why it's so important that our treatment provider come. But because of confidentiality laws, we need each of our participants to sign a confidentiality waiver. Sample waivers are provided in the standards as well as on our website. If you have ever concerns about those, feel free to reach out. Team communication and decision making. We're coming together as an effective team based on our expertise. The standards go so far as to say that a team member who fails to speak up on an area that concerns their expertise, such as a treatment provider failing to point out that a participant needs a change in their treatment plan, or a defense counselor failing to speak up advocating for a lighter sanction for a participant, is a dereliction of their duty. We're coming together because of our expertise, and the success of the team hinges on our contributing based on that expertise. So with that, we really rushed through the standards and the key components. I hope that was okay. This is meant as a larger overview. As I'm sure you picked up on, a lot of these standards can get into real nitty-gritty details, which is the brilliance of the standards. On the flip side, they are not necessarily specific to Indian country, but I think they have a lot of really important considerations for how we can enhance our own healing to wellness course. I want to put a thanks to Carrie and Charlene. Their presentation really helped me in putting this together and reading through the standards. As I mentioned, there are some online training resources that can help dive into the details of these. If there's any particular topic that you would like to receive more specific training on, feel free to put it in the questions or in the survey afterwards. I'd love to know what you'd like to focus on. That can be either specifically one-on-one or in a webinar such as this. Everything's going to be posted on Healing to Wellness course. Let me get my little pen here. You'll be able to find this posted on prior event resources, as well as under our Wellness Court resources. And with that, I'd like to open it up to any questions that you might have. Feel free to type them in the questions box. Otherwise, there is going to be an evaluation that will be posted at the end of this. I sincerely appreciate if you could fill it out, both for my own edification, but also because our funders really appreciate your input as well. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions. Not seeing any. I'd like to thank everyone for sticking it out. I know this was a lot of information in a short amount of time. I apologize we weren't able to get into too many details. I picked up on most of the standards, but know that I didn't discuss every single one, nor did I vocalize every single standard that might have been on a PowerPoint slide. But I think you did get a good chunk of the meat that was in there. I know it's really hard to sit and read these cover to cover, which is why I made this webinar, but if you ever get the chance, particularly on one little subject that might be interesting to you, such as incentives and sanctions, I encourage you to curl up by the fire and pull out the standards to read. They're available for free online. If you have trouble finding them, just send me an email and I'll be happy to send them to you at wellness@tlpi.org. And with that, I will let you all go back to your work. Have a great Friday. Oh, I see we have a question here. Let me see if I can pull this out. Is there additional funding available for existing courts? Yes. So both CTAP and the BJA Adult Drug Court Discretionary Grant are open to existing courts and planning courts. Under CTAP, Purpose Area 3, you can apply for funding for an adult court. You can apply for funding for an adult, family, or juvenile court, both one that's already existing and one that you're planning. It's pretty open and free for however you want to design it. But as I mentioned, I feel like that's kind of intimidating to put such an open-ended application. So I feel like the criteria that the other solicitation provided can be really helpful. Under CTAP, they have explicit funding for juvenile healing wellness courts. That's Purpose Area 8. That's also available for both courts that already exist and courts that are planning. And then what this webinar was inspired by, BJA Adult Drug Court Solicitation is meant just for adult criminal courts, and there it's open to tribes. I conducted a webinar last Friday on that solicitation that I'll be posting this afternoon actually, and I'll post the PowerPoint slides as well. That's a really great source of funding. It's $400,000 for both existing courts and implementation courts. but it's a pretty detailed application. The upside is it's for drug courts, so they know what drug courts are. I think last year 2 tribes were funded, and the year before that 6 tribes were funded. So not a lot, but you do stand a good chance, and I don't think that many tribes apply. So I would definitely put it on my radar. Are there any other questions? Sure thing. All right, well, with that, I want to wish you all a great Friday. Thanks for sticking with me. And feel free to send me any questions as they come to you in the middle of the night. Just write them down and shoot me an email. Thanks so much, and I will catch you next time.